Okay, so one thing that I think is really useful that we get from Seneca's letters are Seneca and the Stoics' view on death. So I want to draw your attention to a couple of the letters where he discusses death. The first one is letter 26. And remember again that this all goes back to the idea that we can't control our fate, so the only thing we can control are our reactions to it. And we're all gonna die. We know that. There's nothing surprising about that. And so Seneca asks, what cause can there be for complaint after all, in anything that was always bound to come to an end, fading gradually away? So why should we complain about the fact that we're going to die? We know what's going to happen. There's no reason to sort of stress out about it. But he does in this letter distinguish well, he doesn't think there's anything really different about like gradually coming to an end being worse than like a sudden and unexpected death. So either one of those things, he says it doesn't matter. But I think it's a really interesting question whether a sudden and unexpected death is worse than one that you could kind of prepare yourself for. But I don't know. It's just a question. Um, Another thing that Seneca deals with in this letter is the legacy that we're going to leave behind. Actually, the legacy that we won't leave behind, because Seneca says it doesn't matter. So a lot of people get worried about the end of their lives, and specifically like what people are going to think of them after they're gone. And Seneca says in letter 26, away with the world's opinion of you. It's always unsettled and divided. Away with the pursuits that have occupied the whole of your life. Death is going to deliver the verdict in your case. So not only are we not supposed to worry about the actual act of death, but we're not supposed to worry about what people are going to say about us after we die. So again, just remember that it's all about the this it's all about the philosophy of apatheia, right? The way that we control our reactions to fate and not try to control fate itself. And Seneca says he gives some really sound advice to Lucilius here, and he says it's only when you're breathing your last that the way you've spent your time will become apparent. I mean, I think that's something we all just sort of accept today, like at the end of your life, it's gonna flash before you. Seneca says, I accept the terms and I feel no dread of the coming judgment. That's what I say to myself, but assume that I've said it to you as well. So it's that advice to not worry about death, to not stress yourself out about what's going to happen when you die, because there is literally nothing you can do. Even though death is the great unknown, Seneca thinks that we can prepare for it by expecting it, and we should then prepare for it. So he tells Lucilius, it's a very good thing to familiarize yourself with death. You might think it's unnecessary to learn something which you only have to put into practice once, but he says that's actually the reason why we should be practicing it. We have to continually study a thing if we're not in a position to test whether we know it. Because death is the great unknown, we should be thinking about it. Not to the point that we're obsessing about it and not living our lives, but we should contemplate our death. Seneca says, we should rehearse death. And to tell someone this is to tell a person to rehearse his freedom. So a person who has learned to die has unlearned how to be a slave. Remember, the thing that we are most slaves to is that fear of death that we have. Okay, so we've talked about our own death. Now, how do we handle somebody else's death? So in letter 63, Seneca is giving some more advice to Lucilius after Lucilius's friend Flaccus has died. And he knows, he's like, look, I know you're upset about this. I can scarcely venture to demand that you should not grieve at all, and yet I am convinced that it is better that way. When one has lost a friend, one's eyes should be neither dry nor streaming. Tears, yes, there should be, but not lamentation. So, he's actually going through and giving some advice about how to properly grieve for a friend here. Seneca thinks that displays of griefs, especially ones that are like excessive, are actually really selfish. So he talks a little bit about how sometimes, it's the display of grief that you're putting off when you cry at a funeral or something. It's not actually for you. It's actually to show people that you care about this person and that it's you're trying to look good for everyone else. So there's no point in having these like excessive displays of grief. Um, and he says further, let us see to it that the recollection of those we have lost becomes a pleasure to us. And he talks about, the way that some people look at this as sort of like sour and sweet. Seneca prefers actually to just think about the happiness that his friends have brought to him. So instead of focusing on how much he is sad about their deaths, he thinks about how happy he is to have made their acquaintance. So he says, let us therefore go all out to make the most of friends, since no one can tell how long we shall have the opportunity. He talks. He admits later in one of the letters, in letter 77, that he did. Oh, sorry. This is still in letter 63. He admits that he wept for his friend Aeneas Serenus when he died, but he even calls himself silly for weeping then. I realize now that my sorrowing in the way I did was mainly due to the fact that I had never considered the possibility of his dying before me, because he was younger, his friend was younger than him. So, he said the thing that made me grieve so much was that I never expected it. I never thought that it would happen. So, one thing to think about is death, and to think about how it will happen and that it will happen. Okay, so letter 77 is the last one I want to talk about. And in this one, Seneca's talking a little bit about suicide. And I love this quote. He says, an ordinary journey will be incomplete if you come to a stop in the middle of it or anywhere short of your destination. But life is never incomplete if it's an honorable one. So at whatever point you leave your life, if you leave it in the right way, it is whole. So he tells this story of a man named Tullius Marcellinus, who was, he was, old before his age, basically, and he got really sick and he started to contemplate suicide. And all of his friends are trying to talk him out of it, except for this one guy who is a Stoic. And his Stoic friend says, hey, there's nothing really great about living anyway. Everyone does it. And what is great is to die in a manner which is honorable, enlightened, and courageous. Think how long now you've been doing the same as them. Food, sleep, sex, the never-ending cycle. The desire for death can be experienced not merely by the enlightened or the brave or the unhappy, but even by the squeamish. So, he talks a little bit about how Tullius wanted just someone to sort of encourage him and tell him that he was doing the right thing. His Stoic friend did, and Seneca says, even though his death was self-inflicted, the manner of his passing was supremely relaxed. It was a mere gliding out of life. The last thing I want to mention here is that Seneca himself had to commit suicide because he got in trouble with Nero. Remember the emperor that he was an advisor and a tutor for. He's a part of this long line of really crappy Roman emperors, right? And so Seneca gets in a little bit of trouble, and Nero orders Seneca to commit suicide. And like a true Stoic, he accepts his fate without complaint. He gets in a bath and makes the water warm, so when he slits his wrist, the blood will run out faster. So Seneca actually, that's one area in which he practiced what he preached. I think we can learn a lot from the Stoics on death. I'm not saying they're right about everything, but I do think especially with questions now about dying with dignity and stuff like that, we can look to a text like this and get some really interesting advice out of it. So I'm gonna stop this one there. All right.